Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of humanity's oldest and most wild partnerships with the natural world. We're tracking how our ancestors went from daring, cliff-scaling honey hunters to incredibly sophisticated scientific beekeepers. It's a story packed with bravery, biology, and the sheer lengths we'd go to for something we totally take for granted today. So, let's get right into it.
Just picture this for a second. A world entirely without refined sugar. No candy, no sweet syrups, just sitting on a shelf. If you lived thousands of years ago and you got a craving for something sweet, your options were, well, virtually non-existent. Actually, scratch that. You did have one option. You could scale a sheer, terrifying vertical cliff using nothing but a flimsy woven vine, just to fight off a massive swarm of angry wild bees. That intense, primal desire for sweetness actually drove some of the very first organized interactions between humans and the natural world.
And when you look at the timeline, it is wild to see how fast things escalated. Way back around 8000 BC, in the Mesolithic era, it was basically just a smash and grab, humans plundering wild hives. Fast forward to 5500 BC, and we start seeing the oldest physical traces of honey and wax pop up in places like Georgia and Greece. But then, right around 2500 BC, we see this massive leap. The first organized clay hives in Egypt, and by 1000 BC, we're talking massive, industrial-scale apiaries in Israel. We literally went from Paleolithic foraging to advanced agricultural science in the blink of an eye.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the first honey hunters, then dive into the birth of industrial beekeeping. From there, we'll hit the science of the classical world, take a quick detour to the Americas for sacred stingless bees, and finally, wrap it all up with ancient medicine and myth.
All right, part one, the first honey hunters. Let's start right at the very beginning.
Before we ever tried to manage bees, we basically just robbed them blind. And this concept is the absolute crucial turning point, the big difference between hunting honey and actual beekeeping. You see, a hunter destroys the wild nest just to get a one-time harvest. Game over for the bees. But a true beekeeper, they sustain the colony. They put them in artificial habitats so they can harvest that liquid gold season after season. This shift happened right alongside our transition from hunter-gatherers to settled farmers during the Neolithic era. And man, it was a massive turning point in human history.
To really grasp how intense those early days were, you just have to look at the Man of Bicorp. This is a famous cave painting near Valencia, Spain, from way back around 8000 BC. It vividly shows this human figure scaling a super loose, woven vine ladder to reach a hive, totally surrounded by a massive cloud of angry bees, just holding a basket to grab the comb. I mean, people were literally risking their lives for this stuff. And the craziest part? This practice hasn't totally disappeared. Today, the Gurung people of Nepal still use hand-woven ladders to harvest honey from giant Himalayan bees on these insane steep cliffs.
Part 2. The birth of industrial beekeeping. Because eventually, humanity realized there had to be a less terrifying way to get honey.
Enter the ancient Egyptians. They were arguably the very first true organized beekeepers. And they didn't just tolerate bees. The bee was so deeply embedded in their culture that it was the official symbol of Lower Egypt all the way back in 3500 BC. When Upper and Lower Egypt finally united, every single ruling pharaoh took the title Bipti. That translates literally to Lord of the Bees. It was the ultimate mark of royal legitimacy and divine order. How cool is that?
And their techniques? Absolutely next level. Egyptian beekeepers weren't just everyday farmers. They actually held really important administrative roles in the royal courts. They even invented what we now call migratory beekeeping. They literally load these horizontal clay tube hives onto boats and sail them up and down the Nile River. Why? To follow the seasonal blooming of flowers from Upper Egypt down to the Delta and back. They were optimizing for maximum honey production all year round, thousands of years ago.
But if you're looking for the most mind-blowing archaeological proof of industrial-scale beekeeping, we actually have to leave Egypt and look at Israel. Imagine archaeologists unearthing an astonishing 200 clay cylinder hives in a single location.
And the craziest thing about this discovery is exactly where they found it. Uncovered in 2007 at the Tel Rehov site, which dates back to the 10th century BC, this wasn't just some guy's backyard hobby. This was a massive, industrial-scale apiary, estimated to hold 1 to 200 hives smack dab in the middle of a densely populated city. And get this, DNA analysis proved these weren't even local bees. They were a specific subspecies imported all the way from Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. This incredible find finally gave physical, literal proof to that famous biblical phrase describing the region as the land of milk and honey.
Moving on to Part 3, Science of the Classical World.
As we hit the classical eras of Greece and Rome, beekeeping goes from a pure farming practice to a serious, rigorous science.
You know Aristotle, right? Well, he was essentially the world's very first bee scientist. In his 4th century BC text, History of Animals, he recorded these astoundingly accurate biological observations, way before anyone had modern genetics or microscopes. He noticed that bees only visit one specific type of flower per foraging trip, a concept we now call flower fidelity. He mapped out the complex division of labor inside the hive, and he even jotted down the earliest known notes describing the famous waggle dance that bees use to tell each other where the good food is. Truly ahead of his time.
Now, they definitely didn't get everything right. The Romans were fantastic agronomists, leaving behind these incredibly detailed manuals on managing apiaries, but they also held on to some completely wild misconceptions. The most famous one? Bougonia. Virgil wrote about this. Bougonia was the completely biologically impossible belief that a brand new, healthy bee colony could just spontaneously generate from the rotting carcass of a sacrificed ox. Yeah, no way. It was a myth that stuck around for centuries, probably because they kept confusing honeybees with certain types of flies that hang around decaying stuff.
All right, part 4, sacred stingless bees. Let's throw in a major plot twist and cross the globe over to the Americas.
Deep in the tropical forests of Central America, the Maya developed this incredibly sophisticated practice called Melipona culture, completely on their own. But they weren't dealing with the stinging bees of Europe or Africa. They raised a tiny, entirely stingless bee called Melipona beechi, and the Maya deeply revered this little creature. They called it Shunan Kab, which translates beautifully to the royal lady of the bees. For them, this wasn't just agriculture. They treated these stingless bees with the utmost respect, viewing them literally as a sacred gift directly from the gods.
When you actually lay these ancient practices out side by side, it is such a testament to human ingenuity. Look at how totally disconnected cultures arrived at completely unique, custom-tailored housing solutions just for their specific type of bee. The Egyptians used stacked clay tubes for their aggressive local bees. The Greeks invented ceramic top-bar hives, which let them pull out combs without destroying the whole nest. And the Maya? They independently figured out how to use hollowed-out wooden logs sealed up with clay discs, perfectly designed for their tropical stingless bees. It just goes to show that observing nature sparks human innovation no matter where you are on the map.
And finally, part 5, ancient medicine and myth. Let's pull it all together and look at how these ancient peoples actually used all these miraculous products coming out of the hives.
In a world way before antibiotics, honey was essentially a medical miracle. Take the Ebers Papyrus from 1500 BC. It's one of the oldest medical texts we have. It proves that Egyptian doctors didn't just casually smear honey on a cut. They intuitively understood the actual physics of it. They knew honey gets runny at human body temperature, so they mixed it with plant fibers and animal fat to engineer this thick, stable paste that would literally stick to severe wounds and burns.
And here is the absolute kicker. This wasn't just ancient placebo or superstition. Modern science totally backs up what the Egyptians, Greeks, and Maya were doing. Why did it work so well? Well, honey has this incredibly high sugar concentration that literally sucks the water out of bacteria and kills them through osmosis. On top of that, it has a low acidic pH that pathogens absolutely hate. And the craziest part? It contains a specific enzyme that naturally and continuously releases hydrogen peroxide. It's a literal natural antiseptic. These ancient doctors were successfully fighting off infections thousands of years before we even had a clue what bacteria were.
We also cannot forget about beeswax. Before we had electricity or cheap paper, the byproducts of the hive were literally the building blocks of human civilization. Think about it. Beeswax gave the ancient world artificial lighting. It coated the wooden tablets the Romans used for all their writing and daily admin. It was an absolute requirement for sealing bodies during Egyptian mummification. And it was the secret sauce in the lost wax technique, which allowed classical artists to cast those breathtaking, highly detailed bronze sculptures.
Because it provided all these incredible life-saving properties, the bee was universally elevated to a sacred symbol across all these disconnected cultures. In Egypt, they believed bees were born from the tears of the sun god Ra. Over in Greece and Rome, writers looked at the super strict organization of the hive and used it as the ultimate political allegory for a perfect, disciplined, harmonious society. To the ancient world, the bee was a universal symbol of immortality, royal power, and perfect divine order.
Which brings us right back to today. The ancients looked at the bee and saw a creature entirely worthy of reverence, a divine partner that was absolutely essential to their survival, their medicine, and their culture.
Today, our global food systems rely on these tiny pollinators more than they ever have in human history. Yet, they're facing unprecedented threats. So, considering that ancient empires viewed the bee as the ultimate symbol of life, order, and survival, are we really doing enough to protect our oldest agricultural partner today? It's definitely something to chew on the next time you enjoy a taste of honey. Thanks for exploring this incredible history with me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.